Welcome to Signal and Insights. We are a podcast that focus on research and insights, and it's great to have today Sean Campbell. He's the CEO and founder of Cascade Insights, a firm he has built over the 20 years into the leading voice at the intersection of AI, adoption research, and workforce enablement. Sean is a professor at George Fox University, teaching Gen AI for business, and author of multiple technology books, host of the B2B Reveal podcasts, and someone who has spent 2 decades studying exactly why companies succeed or fail when adopting new technology. His current message is blunt and necessary. Your team has AI tools, they don't have AI results. Let's talk about why. Sean, welcome to Signal and Insights.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
Perfect. Let's start at the beginning. You had been studying B2B technology adoption since 2006. What were you seeing back then, and how did that eventually lead you to the AI focused firm Cascade is today?
Yeah, well, and to be fair, although this isn't, everybody's public bio has limits, right, in terms of what you can visualize, but I've actually been an entrepreneur since 99. And that whole time, and even before that, really, I was a technology trainer. So pretty much ever since I left my master's degree, I've been either training, educating, or kind of helping organizations understand technology adoption. That's been at the heart of everything I've ever done, either from a research standpoint or a teaching standpoint, or just hands-on work that I've done, obviously, with these technologies over the years. From an AI, and you mentioned 2006, though, rightly, because that's when Cascade Insights got its start. But I had a company I grew and sold
Yes.
before that. But um, the AI focus is obviously recent. If I had a LinkedIn bio that says, I've been researching AI adoption for 20 years, I think somebody should call me out on that.
Oh,
Although I'm sure that
yeah.
exists on LinkedIn right now, either as an editorial fail or let's just say intentional misdirection. But that's not what my profile says. So the AI focus is a pretty, as most kind of career evolutions are, obvious in retrospect, right? So you have somebody who owns a firm circa 3-4 years ago that is working very deeply with B2B technology providers and has so for a long time. Microsoft, AWS, Google, Salesforce, Dell. We reached a point where there were a lot fewer names on the Fortune 500 tech list that we hadn't worked with than we had. And there's some that I always wish I did. Like, we never worked with Apple. The closest I got is I had a meeting in the cafeteria at Apple, the old campus, even not even as cool as the new campus. And we just never got a project from Apple. So that's fine. But I didn't have that many meetings either. So I guess it's okay. But, and so clearly the tech sector was the first to be impacted by AI. And I very intentionally didn't say create because, sure, the tech sector, you could say created AI, but, AI has existed in a variety of forms prior to the latest, kind of mass adoption and democratization of it, right? And it depends on how far back we want to go on topics like machine learning and all the rest. But clearly the tech sector has not only amplified that wave and driven it over the last 3 years, but they've also been the biggest consumers of it. Like I say pretty readily, if you want to see what's going to happen to a marketing team or an insights team or a development team, and you are in a non-technology company, you are in oil and gas, or you're in manufacturing, or you're in pharmaceuticals, or you're in retail, just look at what's happening in tech. Because I think people are quick to discount that, and they go, well, that's tech because tech created AI, and they're biased and they've got their own lean, and that's not really the right way to look at it. I mean, a lot of those operational decisions that are being made, either it's staffing or the kinds of attributes they're looking for employees or the rest, or 1,000 other things. There's some very early signals you can get. So I say all that because I looked at all that happening, 3 odd years ago, and I'm like, we should be more focused on AI than an alignment that says we're focused on B2B plus tech. And because all B2B companies are going to be challenged by AI, every single one of them. We don't do any consumer oriented work. That's the one thing we don't do, just because consumer insights work And I think consumer-oriented, even AI adoption is a very different animal than business to business. And business to business is kind of where I've had my, kind of longest stint, basically. It's kind of my whole career of sorts. Um, anyway, and that's basically it. And, and then I can tie in the university piece whenever there makes sense to do that, and how that all came to play. But it was really just a logical decision that, you know, this is not just going to affect tech, it's going to affect every B2B company. And I've always felt being a little more narrow is more advantageous, not just for us as a firm, but I think it's advantageous for clients, because the more narrow we are, it's probably more likely that we're going to give you better advice in the end.
Yeah, that's correct. And follow that. I saw that you find that basically you can help both sides of the market. So basically, studying AI buyers and educating AA users. And I think you realize that no one else was doing both, right? Um, how had been your process so far, and your evolution to be recognized that basically you're able to do both things?
Well, and I'll try to give a shorter answer this time, because anybody listening might be like, "Is he going to give another 5 minute answer?" I didn't try not to do that in the beginning, but like, so I'll try to keep it short. But you can draw me in more if you want. Like, one, I'm ever since I was little, and I could tell you why that's true, but that's a different story. But ever since I was little, like long before I was employable, I had a I was pathologically incapable of learning something and not wanting to teach it. And that's infected my entire life. So to me, I've always been teaching clients and doing actual teaching. This isn't my only stint at a university setting as a professor, right? Um, the one I have now. And so, and even my own model of leadership tended to be more like teacher as leader more than other models, right? And so for me, I looked at it and I thought, people are going to get run over by this. And they're not really aware to some extent of how much they're going to get run over by this. This is a step change technology that I think people are even now still struggling to recognize how much it's going to impact them personally, like from a career standpoint. I meet people all the time, right? And yet I hear other stories of somebody, I won't say which law sector, but a sector of law where great guy, I've known him for years. He heard from his boss that in 3 years, there won't be any more lawyers in his team. Why? Because of AI. Now, you may say that's a radical notion, but those kind of conversations are starting to happen, right? So I'm seeing that's going to happen, and I have a heart that people don't get run over by this. I'm a teacher at heart, and I'm like, wait a minute. So I own a research firm. Professors, they research and teach. This seems pretty logical. So I'm going to go ahead and almost add back in what I've had earlier in my career, which was more of like a educational teaching component to the business. And to what you said, it is absolutely right. I think to my knowledge, we're the only firm, but it's a big world out there. So there might be 8 of them, right? But there's only so many firms I can think of that have as deep of a research expertise as we have, looking at how people adopt technology, going back decades. And many years now, several years at least, with AI in the focus. And at the same time, turning around and educating people about how to meaningfully use AI in a B2B context. So there's a really nice interplay there, I think, when it comes to training and research, right? Uh, and yeah, it's been fun. I mean, so anyway, that's as short as I can make it for now. But go ahead. What other questions you got?
No, because it gave me exactly to the next thing. So basically, research showed that 79% of companies face like a significant challenges at adopting AI. I mean, I think personally it's even more. And some estimates put the failure rate, yeah, like a higher, because there are things that basically they can't oversee yet. So you have studied technology adoption for years, and is AI adoption harder than what came before, or is the same story playing out again with a new technology?
No, it's harder. It has to be harder. And there's a couple reasons
Yeah.
why. One, it's crazy fast, which is easy to say if you're in tech, right? Everything seems like it's fast. Like mobile came out fast, cloud computing came out fast. You know what I mean? Like pick your favorite tech trend, right? Um, and I think what's different about this is the time horizon is so much shorter between the evolutionary loops, and it's only going to get tighter, right? Why do we see Anthropic shipping so many different releases and foundational kind of initiatives? Well, because a lot of their code's written by AI now, and they've said as much. So humans aren't the speed bump. Not that we were the speed bump, but you know what I mean? But we were a slower code writer, if you will, than AI. Does that mean humans aren't in the loop? No, that's not the conversation I'm having. I think humans still need to be in the loop, but it certainly accelerates things. Um, and it's happening in kind of a time scale that's really challenging for people when it comes to career making decisions, I think, too. You know, we're reaching a point where whole careers, whole sectors, certain jobs just don't exist anymore. Are we really going to have customer support agents picking up the phone? I mean, really? No, we're not. I mean, if anybody's used the Sesame demo that was only in beta, just like today or yesterday, they released a mobile app version of it, Voice AI. Highly recommend you go download and stick it on your phone. I sat on my couch this morning and finally got in on the beta for the phone version. I was having a conversation with Miles like it was just somebody else. I was asking about what was going on in the war in the Persian Gulf right now, and I was asking him about oil prices, and I was just you know, the evolutionary speed here is so fast that I think it leaves people a little blind to what's really going on. And so that's one challenge, right? Because if you make an assumption about what AI can do 3 months ago, um, that's really wrong, frankly. You need to be looking at it really regularly, which that is challenging from that standpoint. I think the other big thing is, and people can disagree on this point, but I think when we look back at the history of computing, right? Computing tended to take on those tasks that were, you know, let's just say heavily computational, right? We were happy to go have Excel calculate formulas for us, you know? Um, but this goes after things that are more uniquely human, you know, and that's threatening to people. Just look at the creative industry, right? They're wrestling with this deeply now about like, what does it mean to create with AI, without AI, you know, all those kinds of things. And that's coming for everybody. You know, writers are a really good example, right? I mean, how many times can you go look at LinkedIn and see, you know, if you use AI to write, you're an idiot. And somebody else says, well, why wouldn't I use AI to write? Because it makes better writing, you know? So all these domains that I think we thought were uniquely human, AI is, for lack of a better word, attacking, right? And that also makes it very, very different because if you sum it up there, you know, computing kind of went after left brain things, you know, compile this code for me, you know, run this formula in Excel. Like they were very analytical, computational kinds of things, which makes sense, right? Um, but when we go over to these right brain functions, right? Um, it's much more threatening to people. Like, what do you mean AI could have a conversation with another human and resolve their concerns? I called Starlink the other day because I had a question about maybe getting home service via Starlink. We have a Roam unit, and I was going to maybe get one for home, their home max plan. The entire conversation was with an AI agent, and to be honest, it was great. And then I felt kind of horrible about that because I own a research firm. We do qualitative interviews, and I know there's AI interviewer platforms, and some of them are actually pretty good. So, you know, we just haven't had that happen before, right? Where it's going after such uniquely, you know, what we felt were like almost human centered domains that were never going to be impacted. Um, and I think and one last thing is, you know, this isn't unique to just knowledge work, right? You know, while this show, I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time on robotics, right? And that's not necessarily my area of expertise, but I'm watching that space because, you know, all the conversations about, um, let's just go into manual labor jobs, right? You just got to wait 5, 10 years. And robotics plus AI plus the advances in power management and battery life, we're going to have robots doing a lot of manual labor work, you know, for better or worse, they don't file workers' comps claims. And, you know, that's not me trying to be jaded about it. There's just real economics behind like a robotic workforce that we won't walk away from. So, yeah, there's a million things about this that are different. And it's why I have a heart for it because I feel like we need to really understand empathetically what this is doing to people. Um, and we need to start with that, frankly. And I don't think everybody does.
100%. I follow the words of David Hassabis around the ultimate integrator. So basically, you just throw a problem and eventually you will be able to fix it. And as you mentioned, I had this conversation with a video producer and an artist friend of mine a couple of years ago, and they were adamant against creativity, AI and creativity. I have the same conversations today. It's completely different. So yeah, it's completely changing. And you have posted that the wrong measure of AI success is logins, that the right measure is whether work actually change. Why do so many organizations get that wrong? And what should be tracking instead?
Well, I think ultimately you should be tracking out, not output volume, but like impact, you know? And I think that's a fundamental problem in all management, right? Is that it's very, very easy to focus on tracking metrics. If you're a market research insights team, right? You might track downloads of reports from your SharePoint portal, right? Or whatever portal you use, right? And you might call that engagement and you might say that's success. And if you're a marketing team, there's obviously analogs for that in terms of like customer marketing, and sales teams have analogs for that for touch points. And you could go almost every business function and find something like that. But ultimately you have to focus, I think, on like outcomes, like how many more customers have you actually been able to, create? How many more customers have you been able to retain? Have you been able to do that in a more meaningful way? It reminds me of a conversation I had once, this particular on Insights, with a guy that was starting a competitive intelligence function in a Fortune 500, lower Fortune 500 to be fair, but still a Fortune 500. Ended up growing the team to about 14 people pretty rapidly, and asked me at one point, what do you think my main KPI should be? And I got back a lot of, output metrics, how many, the equivalent today of like, how many tokens have you used, right? Which we know is a bad proxy, but we're using it because it's hard to come up with another one at the moment, right? Um, and I said, what if your KPI was decisions impacted? And he's like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, what if 6 months after you delivered the insights, you're probably doing that all the time. So like every 6 months, say, what decisions have you made differently based on the insights I delivered to you in the past? And I said, if you had a drawer of 10 of those, you'd probably never get your function deleted when cost cutting comes around. On the other hand, if you turned around and said, but wait a minute, our reports have been downloaded. Sorry, we're downsizing your department. And why do people not do that? I think part of it's maybe fear that they won't get the answer they want. Part of it is, weirdly enough, sometimes I think fear of doing one's own research on one's own business, which is a little different than the answer you want, just general fear about it. And part of it is they just hit the easy button, right? It's easier to just track downloads and call it success. So, and I think AI is going to force us to all those kinds of things. I mean, I read one last thing on this. I read a really great article just today on a guy that has a Substack on AI and finance. And he talked about, the fact that if, like, I'm paraphrasing his article, so he used slightly different words, but it was like, if you're a quant, right, you're of that side of the world, right? And clearly there are those in the market research industry, there are those kind of folks in the finance industry and a lot of industries. And he said, you got to get used to the fact that, like, the programmatic aspects of your job, they're just going to AI because they're boxable, they're rule-based, they're easy for AI to discern. And again, what's the doppelganger? Look at what's happening with coding in tech companies, right? And those things that will be left for you to do, those are judgment. But here's the catch: is anybody who's led people, especially who's led people who maybe are those quants, not all those quants can become people who are really good at judgment. That's a lot more of like a human factors problem. That's a lot more about emotional IQ. Can those things be taught? To a degree. And I say that because, we've all known somebody who has really high emotional IQ and is a great communicator and is really good with people. Maybe we just call those salespeople. Do we turn them into quantitative data analysts and just say, I guess you could go learn that tomorrow? No, we'd laugh at that notion most of the time. We'd say like, oh, no. I mean, that's really not the career you should have. So I think we've got a lot of reckonings that are about to happen. on that front, right? Like, not just how we're measuring people, but how do we get people into these jobs that we're kind of quick and flip to say, well, they're more human-centered jobs. Like that's what you got to go after. Well, what if they're not necessarily wired to that? Like what's their path? How do we train them? How do we get them over? You know? Um, those are questions we really don't have good answers to right now. At least at a society level, much less even sometimes in some businesses.
I agree. And in that sense, how do you feel businesses are coping with AI? Of course, I think it depends on the industry, either but business itself. I know that you work more with B2B, but what does a company look like when it's getting AI adoption right? What are the specific behaviors or signals that tell you, hey, this one is going to stick and work?
Well, I would say one, they haven't sold their soul to a particular model because it's too early for that. It's way too early for that. Two, IT is not in charge of it all. I've interviewed a tons of great IT leaders over the years, for the research we've done. Wonderful people, great people. You should not let your AI rollout be controlled by IT. You just should not. I think organizations that they're usually slower to adopt AI and sometimes on the order of not just months, but even years. And they don't do nearly as meaningfully or as deeply within a business function. And the reason for that, I think, is just what I was talking about earlier. AI is going after, in a very deep way, the job to be done, if you will, right? The jobs to be done within a job. And the only person who really understands what is safe to delegate to an AI is someone who's doing that job. I mean, yes, there's technical considerations. Yes, there is AI governance and policy
Yeah,
and all that. And I agree with
compliance,
that. Right. And you have to have that. But
privacy.
I see far too often that the IT team is just this slowing and slowing and slowing the rollout. And meanwhile, their competitors who've given more power to the line of business leaders who really can make meaningful decisions about what's safe to delegate to AI and what's not is a big deal. And I think a delegation mindset is really big. Um, I think the easiest framing at the moment, at least, and maybe in the foreseeable future too, whether it's more of a chat-based model or agentic model or whatever of your AI use, is if you put yourself in the mindset of what it's like to delegate to a human effectively, you are already a good amount of the way there in how to delegate to AI effectively. So, for example, like if we go to another human and we say, go do this for me, well, that didn't really provide a lot of context. It didn't provide a lot of goal setting. We didn't give them enough data up front to really like understand how decisions have been made in the past and how that should impact decisions in the future. We haven't given them a way to communicate back to us like more effectively about progress. We haven't asked for interim deliverables. And all of those things I just mentioned, if you delegate well, you probably do those things innately with another human. But yet people don't do that well with AI sometimes. They just chuck in prompts and like pray for success, right? Or they set up a rudimentary agentic model and they don't really think through all those things I mentioned. But in a weird way, it's not that hard, right? If you just think of what really good human to human delegation is, there is a lot of that we can borrow and apply to how we delegate to AI. And I think why is that not a normal part of the conversation? Because sometimes we treat it almost too much like a technology, right? I mean, whether you like it or not, fundamentally, AI is going to be a teammate in your business. You may not like calling it a teammate, and you can elect to not call it a teammate, but it is functionally taking tasks away from human beings and doing them in enough significance that you need less teammates. So I don't know what you call it, but an AI teammate in that case.
Yeah. That makes complete sense. Let's change the focus a little bit about Cascade works on client reality. So Cascade serves two distinct clients, like companies adopting AI and B2B tech companies building AI solutions who needs to understand their market. Walk me through how those two practices inform each other. What the research side tell you that makes you a better trainer and vice versa.
Well, that one's actually pretty easy and short. I mean, obviously by researching how AI is being, adopted, we have a good sense of typical pain points, whether those are more emotional pain points or logical pain points or technological pain points. Clearly, when you're in the insights business, some of that is, owned by the client, per se, and we obviously honor that. But at the same time, like any practicing business professional, lawyers have the same thing. You start to see trends, across what you're looking at. And that's really helpful when it comes to thinking about like where are people going to get stuck when it comes to adoption and training. And then the converse is equally true, because if you're doing training or you're doing consulting helping people adopt AI, you get a much more intimate view of what's really holding people up. Because I mean, even the best market research interview is what, 60 minutes, more rarely 90 minutes, right? And that's a function of calendar and time, and people don't want to do a 5-hour interview, which we all understand, right? I
They don't
mean,
want to do
you know,
it. Yeah.
right. And who wants to lead a 5-hour interview, right? You know what I mean? Podcast interviews aren't 5 hours, except for the occasional, like,
They get distracted.
long running
Yeah.
show that like, there's like 4 of them where they do like 4-hour interviews, right? So, we're trapped by that. And yet, if you work side by side with a team for a while, you start to pick up a little bit more, and maybe you validate some of the things that you've learned in research, or maybe you learn some questions to ask in your next research study that you hadn't thought of before. I mean, like one simple one, right? That's obvious in retrospect, but I see it all the time, is if you talk to AI vendors right now, they would feel that they have a very clear description of agentic AI. They would tell you that. If you talk to actual users of agentic AI, they stick that term on everything. Some stuff that's agentic and some stuff that isn't. So if you go field a survey, you have to be really, really specific about how you're going to describe agentic. Because to one person, agentic, and I've seen people do this just straight up, I built a Lindy workflow and built an agentic workflow. I'm like, no, that was a workflow. I mean, that was an AI-driven
That's a
workflow. And
workflow.
yes, Lindy has agents. They sell them as agents. But when I look at Lindy, I don't really think of that as entirely agentic with a capital A, but it's kind of there, and then, and all of those, and that's not any diss against Lindy. I love Lindy AI. I use it for all kinds of stuff, but, or somebody fires up, a Copilot agent. That was my favorite. I was talking to a client the other day, and the team was like, well, we made a lot of agents. We've made a lot of agents. We've really invested in agentic. And I'm like, well, what have you done? Well, we've made Copilot agents. I'm like, okay, well, Copilot agent, I outside of the challenges with Copilot in general, you know what I mean? The naming of what a Copilot
Just
agent does is more akin to a gem or a GPT. Now, I know someone from Microsoft will immediately comment in this thread and say, no, you don't understand. Agents can do so much more. I'm like, I know, but that's part of the problem, isn't it? I mean, that's exactly part of the problem. So, um, that's one of those things that came up really loud and clear just from doing the training and the research, right? And we're not done with that. I think the next 12 months there's going to be a whole bunch of that we're going to be dealing with, specifically just around the term agentic, where the vendors feel increasingly that people get it, and the actual buyers are using it to define all different types of states of being when it comes to working with AI, which don't necessarily correlate with what the vendor thinks is in their head.
yeah, because in some cases they are learning the usage of the specific, features of the platform, but still not well defined and or universally accepted or adopted for everybody, because it's just the nature of experimentation that is around the idea of AI in the companies. So let me ask you about the fractional chief AI officer offer. I think that's interesting. Not every company needs a full-time AI executive to guide, but every company navigating AI needs strategic leadership. Who is the right client for that, and what's the conversation that usually triggers in with your clients?
Well, I think to some extent, it ties back to what I said earlier, right? It's an organization that recognizes a couple things. One, that IT can be a partner in AI adoption, but maybe they shouldn't be in the lead, because you could, make an argument that you would just hire somebody in IT to be the digital transformation officer equivalent for AI, right? Which, may work for some companies. And at the same time, the line of business leaders you already have already have a full-time job. And you're asking them to reinvent their job, to look at their job almost on a weekly basis and say, how can I optimize this part of my job and that part of my job? And you're asking everybody in the company somehow to stay on top of what's happening in AI. I don't know how many Substack subscriptions I have, but let's just say it's in the 20s and 30s and maybe 40s, right? And that's just Substack. And I look at those every week just so I can stay on top of what's going on. So like, who's going to do that job? Um, and then I'd say the other thing about it is I think a good fractional AI officer understands this isn't just a technology shift. There's a whole amount of human factors that go into this. And that person can be a mixture of a shock absorber for that and good counsel for that. And that's really, really important. The ZoomInfo CEO who just did a whole round of layoffs just the other day, which again, I mean, I'm not knocking them for that. Maybe that was the right move. But he did an interview not that long ago where he said very gleefully in the middle of the interview, I cut this team from 26 to 2, 26 to 2. And nowhere in that did he even make mention of what the 24 people went off and did or whether they were even there anymore. So, I think if you get the right fractional AI officer, they understand the tech, they understand what's happening on a minute by minute basis with AI. So you can take advantage of it quickly. They know how to talk to IT. They understand the governance concerns. They understand the security concerns. They're not just like an evangelist for AI. And yet they also understand that there's a really huge emotional component. I mean, I think one thing that's really driven over a lot, unfortunately, is that, if you're a leader and you talk to your team about AI, you rightly are excited about the P&L impact, the profit and loss impact for your company, right? You can see how you can do more with less. And it's hard to think of anything that we've ever seen that impacts, knowledge work the same way in terms of like what we can reduce. But the minute you're having that conversation, everybody in the room is going, well, what does that mean for me? And there's so many times it seems like I see people talk about it with all that fervor, but they don't talk about all the other human factors piece of it. And one really last big thing I want to say about that is, like with my own team, I've never once told them that everything will be fine, even with AI. I have very consciously not said that sentence because I don't know. And if you're being authentic as a leader, you don't really know exactly how your company is going to evolve. Will you fight tooth and nail to keep your best people? Will you find ways for them to evolve as things are changing as a result of AI? Absolutely. And you should do that. But I think anybody that just says, like, I'll keep everybody no matter what, I don't think they've taken even an economics 101 class. I mean, who knows what's going to have to change in your business as a result of AI? That's really hard to predict at this point. And I think the more you can be authentic about that reality, I think you get probably more respect for that than just walking in with, rainbows and sunshine and telling everybody that it'll be fine, or threatening everybody with gloom and doom and assuming that will motivate them. I think there's definitely something in the middle that you can strive for.
Like this idea about this cultural understanding and emotional connection, because at the end of the day, what changes that you do in one specific department on the organization will have an effect of the entire organization as well. And yeah, 100% agree. It's not, we don't know what change is going to happen next, right? Because it goes so fast, is very hard to predict at the same time. So, thinking about the clients where Cascade has had the best outcomes, AI adoption actually stuck, the organization actually changed. Can you walk me through one of those stories and tell me what made it work?
Well, I mean, this is the one time I'll be slightly vague because, anything we do with clients, particularly on the research side, is um, it's kind of a strategic advantage that they know something before somebody else, right? Um, so I would just circle back to the things we talked about before, right? I think the things that make it work are you have, I'm thinking a particular engagement in mind, but I won't name the client, but you have somebody who's an empathetic leader. either, as a fractional or somebody internally. You have somebody who is really listening to kind of what's happening in the market. You have somebody who is um, thinking very deeply about what jobs are most impacted by AI versus which ones aren't, because it's not equal in that regard. Um, and fundamentally, I think you've also got to come to grips with the fact that this is an ongoing initiative. You don't learn AI on, one Saturday afternoon via LinkedIn learning course and you're done. I mean, we will be, as leaders, and I think, companies that have adopted AI well, or companies we work with fit this mold, they understand that they're entering a world, and they're basically in it now, where every team is a hybrid of AI's output and human output. It just is. There will be outliers who will just demand that AI is not part of their workflow. And I respect that. I do. But I don't think that'll be the lion's share of business. I mean, management will fundamentally mean managing AI output and human output. And I think the companies that understand that we're already here, and that's what I get to deal with, they're the ones who are most successful. So those are just some things that come to mind. Stuff that tends to make things work.
That's a great, like a very high level example. And when you get an outcome like that basically works well, how do you go out and find more clients like them?
Well, I mean, some of that is just good hard work. I mean, um, people have acquired consulting services in many of the same ways for decades, and AI changes some of that for sure, right? Now you have to rank well in, a given AI platform, to be found, right? Uh, I'd say 50 to 70% of our leads now come out of something from an LLM, where they say, like, I searched XYZ about, the kind of services you offer, and you guys showed up there. Now, some of that percentage is so high because of the lane we're in. But, I'm sure anybody listening, by the time this gets published, might have actually heard of, like, Google Zero, right? The idea that, like, Google will stop sending search traffic because everything will come, like, right out of their AI platform. These are real considerations, right? And Google's been a little vague during the week we're talking about this, about whether they think that's coming or not. They're like, well, you should plan for various futures, was apparently like some interview I saw the other day, which is corporate speak for, yeah, probably going to happen, right? Um, whether somebody else shows up to fill that gap, of course, of knowledge management, knowledge sharing is a whole nother question for a whole nother group of people. But um, yeah, so a lot of it's good referenceable accounts, a lot of it's being in the right place, a lot of it's sharing meaningful content, on subjects that matter, finding a lane and a voice that people appreciate. I think that's important. Um, and being narrow enough to matter, like we said at the top, right? I think in consulting, that's always a big deal, right? You have to decide that aperture question about how broad do I open it up so that I have a meaningful market, but at the same time that I don't show up in, every client meeting trying to, overgeneralize across like 5 projects that, really have no correlation with each other, in terms of domain expertise. So, in a weird way, I don't think it's like rocket science. I think we've done some cool things. I think we've done some interesting things about the way we've approached the market. The Art of Asking book that I wrote um, has really been nice in terms of like uptake. The full title is The Art of Asking: Effectively Collaborating with AI. And I received some really nice feedback on that, and I'm very grateful for that. But I could sum all this up. I'm an educator at heart, so I've just gone to what strategy I've always used, which is just thou shall educate, and that's kind of where I've been. Uh, Other people may have other strategies, but that's the one that I've always found works the best.
That's amazing, understanding where people are, what they want to achieve, and finding, the right process to teach them what they need to learn in order to achieve those goals. Yeah. Let's change the focus a little bit about AI next chapters and what is changing. You study AI buyers closely. What do B2B buyers actually want from AI vendors right now? And what are vendors getting wrong about how they go to market with their AI products?
It's a good question.
It's a very broad question. Yeah.
Yeah. I would go back to the agentic thing. I think that's the biggest one. I mean, I was counseling a client on that just yesterday. That like, you know, client says in so many words, like, we want a market that we can help people with their agentic deployments. Great. Do you realize that that phrase alone doesn't mean the same thing to everybody? You know, so we got a terminology issue. Um, I think we've definitely got a maturity issue, right? Meaning, yeah, I shouldn't even say a maturity issue. I would say it's an expiration date issue. So many people's perceptions are based on AI that they used for a use case 6 months ago, and they found it wanting and not useful, and they've decided it doesn't work. You know, I hesitate to believe this is true, but someday Copilot might even be useful, right? So, um, at least compared to its peers, right? So I think there's a real challenge in getting people to try it again, right? Because this is a democratized solution in some ways, right? Especially if we're talking about just people's exposure to AI. Um, and definitely there's that issue about like IT and line of business kind of bouncing against each other a little bit. And what does that mean for the AI tool stacks that you use and adopt? I mean, let me give you a real concrete case there. I mean, like, I think you're in a rock and a hard place if you've been a Microsoft customer. And this isn't me trying to be negative on Microsoft. I mean, maybe it had turned the other way and Google had failed to come to, the market with a meaningful model. I mean, the truth is Microsoft partnered with OpenAI in the beginning. I mean, it certainly seemed like they had the inside lane, if you go back 3 years from now, or 2 years from now. So, you know, how do you meaningfully evolve your tech stack at this rate, right? That's a huge thing. And another big thing is data security, right? Um, there, it's better than maybe it was a couple years ago, but like, even now it's very, very easy for employees to go find some AI tool that they want to go use and not really spend a lot of time looking at how that data is going to be ingested. So, there's a whole bunch of stuff like that to consider. If I picked one thing though, I think vendors believe that buyers are more up to speed and savvy about what AI is capable of than they actually are. And if I had a second thing, I think there's a constant misstep in they're just shouting the vendors of how productive you can be, but they're not following that up with another beat of, but we understand this will cause disruptions and this is how we'll help you navigate that. And this is how this is like empowers your team. And, in meaningful ways, it's just all this almost shrill, this will make the bottom line better. Right. And that's it. And that is part of it. I agree. That is absolutely part of it. More apps, more code, more invoices processed. You know what I mean? More sales made, more leads sent, more, conversions on the website. I get all that. But I think a vendor that finds a way to marry that with a human-centric, kind of voice, that's going to be really powerful. And I think, to be honest, that's a little bit of why people like Anthropic so much right now. Because, and I'll admit, at the moment, I'm an Anthropic fanboy. I may not be later, because again, I think you should be careful about, assuming a given AI platform is the winner at this point. They really are, I think, deeply trying to think through what they're doing to the world with what they're creating. and I think they're struggling, at least more so than some companies, fairly openly about that, and not just dismissing it as get on the bandwagon and deal with it, or just simply driving over the minions whose jobs are affected by it and just talking to the business leaders, right? So I think the first company that, the first traditional B2B tech vendor who's incorporating AI that really like incorporates that human side as much as the technology side. And I haven't really seen anybody do it well yet, except maybe Anthropic. And they're not a traditional vendor. Obviously, they're not one of the long-standing vendors that everybody's heard of. The Microsofts, the Dells, the AWSs, whatever. Uh, I think they're going to do pretty well, but to date, I haven't really seen it.
Yeah, because everything is changing so fast. Um, and if you see, the progression, let's talk about the future. How do you see platforms evolve in the next 12 to 18 months? I know that is like a very crazy to
Oh no, I
try
can give
to
you I can give you an
predict
easy one
things.
because I talked about it earlier. Voice. I mean, right now we are having this long-running argument that never seems to be resolved on, let's say on LinkedIn, but many other places about if you didn't create that image, it's not yours. And if you didn't write that piece, it's not yours. And the other side says, their argument of, well, if I get my thoughts out more effectively and clearly and directly, what's wrong with that? And if I remove the AI
You have
slop
my
from it,
signature.
right. And if it's still me, right, what's wrong with that? And but here's what's going to happen is we're going to have that about voice in detail. And the Sesame app's a really good example of that. Um, but I don't think people quite realize how much we're going to talk to AI. And that changes a lot of things, right? That changes what does the office look like if we're all talking to our AI teammate all day? Or several AI teammates? Do we really believe we're going to sit down at a keyboard and type everything? I mean, really? No.
Yeah.
And it's
I
why
use
the B2B
Whisperflow for
vendors,
many
right, right.
emails.
Right.
Hmm.
And it's why the B2B vendors, if you notice one area of the insights industry that seems to be, especially in AI companies, that seems to be growing, it's the UX side of the team, the UX research team. Because I mean, I'm not saying anything that you can't figure out just from looking at job postings. Like they're trying to figure out, well, what is the interaction modality? Like, how do I really interact with an AI? Do I talk to it? Do I show up my video and it interprets my video? Does it read my whole screen, which we've seen failed and moderately successful attempts at that? Um, Again, unfortunately knocking Microsoft for what they did with like recall or whatever it was, you know what I mean? That they rolled out horribly in the beginning, you know? Um, so the only thing I do know talking is going to feel really efficient. And like, for example, if anybody's used Whisperflow, which is a great tool for like dictating anything to your computer that's AI driven. And I could sing sonnets about Whisperflow. I could. It's amazing in what it does. And if people are wondering like how is it better than regular AI transcription, just trust me. There's specific reasons you could go look at it. And no, I do not get a commission from transferring over to those guys. But the point is, talking to AI will be super normative in 2027. And I don't see anybody talking about it that way. I mean, the vendors know it's coming, right? They know it's coming. And we have interactions with like my Starlink interaction, right? Where I'm just talking to like an AI at that point, right? Um, but I think it's going to radically change in some ways what we think we input into an AI and the tone, and maybe the AI starts reading our tone and responding to that. You seem kind of unsure about that last thing you just input. Well, that doesn't come through when you type it in. You have to tell it you were unsure, right? So I think that's the biggest thing that's coming, and it's right around the corner. And if I had to pick the next thing, I would say it's much farther out, so it's not like an intermediate leap, but robotics impact on all the jobs that we are kind of declaring safe right now. I think people just don't quite understand how big that's going to be. And I think it's because robotics has always felt distant and clunky. And it just does, or it feels like it's just something on the factory floor, right? And we're about to jump over all that. And, I'm not as much of a robotics guy to be able to predict the day. And I wouldn't even try. But I think anybody who's watching the space knows that that's a lot closer than people think it is. Like a lot closer.
Yeah. Tesla closing those factories, I think for two models, right? The S and the X, and basically to build the prime robot that is built by other robots. Yeah,
Right, which is
that's
just
it.
like the
I
coding
mean,
loop we're
I don't
starting
know what's
now.
gonna
Right,
happen.
exactly. Just like the coding loop that's starting now, right? We're like, you start to see massive
Coding,
acceleration leaps in some of these tech
coding.
companies because, their AI is writing all their code, which then very much speeds up the feature release schedule and like what they can produce and all that kind of stuff.
And the impact of the hallucination as well would be bigger, could be potentially bigger as well. But this part can be part of other conversations. So let me ask
Right.
you a couple questions more and then we close it. Where do you want Cascade Insights to be 12 to 18 months from now? And what needs to go right to get there?
I'd like us to be really well recognized for being the hybrid that we are, you know? I've been a business owner long enough that I do think I haven't seen anybody exactly like us, that's bridging the two things that we're talking about with the same volume. I'm sure it exists, uh, but like I said, I don't think anybody has the same research background that we do and doing all the training and educating and, all that kind of stuff. But, um, so I'd like to have that grow and expand. And I obviously have really enjoyed the time I've spent at the university and I'd like that to grow and expand. Um, you know, I'd like to just kind of keep being an educator and a researcher and a teacher, and as the company grows as part of that, that's great too, and that leads to opportunities for the employees and all the rest. Um, so I don't know. That's more of the same, I guess, if that makes sense. It's probably what I want.
And it's great that you keep that balance between being a CEO and also being a teacher. That's great to hear. And if you have a magic wand to fix just one thing, either on how the market approaches AI adoption or inside Cascade, what will it be?
Mm. Well, there's so many magic wands I wish I had. Uh, I'm tempted to say the tokens were cheaper because I'm sure if I could if I could do a lot more with Claude for $20, I'd probably, you know what I mean? I already have like a max plan and then another max plan and you know what I mean? Like, but um honestly, if I could have one thing, it's not really about Cascade. It's not. And this isn't me trying to be like overly like, generous to the world or whatever. I genuinely feel uh that I want people to get how disruptive this is going to be. You know, Ethan Mollick, who's a guy I follow a lot, said about a couple months ago, and I was bang on. He said, if AI's evolution stopped today and it never got any smarter at all, it would already be massively disruptive to work. And he's right. And that was a couple months ago. So what I would hope is that people meaningfully experiment. I mean, you can with this. It's a nice thing about it. It's democratized. And really ask yourself some tough questions. Where is my career going? Where is my team going? Where is my company going? How do I end up on the right side of this when it's all over? So maybe my wish would be that I would know exactly what that path is, right? You know what I mean? Because I got to figure it out just like everybody else. Um, but but I feel like I'm more on the right path than not on the wrong path, right? I feel like I'm on the right path, but that's what I want. I want people to understand the urgency. This is not something to sit on. And that's not self-serving. That's from a heart position that I back all the way to the beginning. I told the dean this when I started at the school. I have a heart that people do not get run over by this. And there are some people that are just staring out in the distance and they have no idea how big the ball is that's headed to them from behind them. And I just want those people to turn around and actually see what's coming. That's what I want.
That's great. Sean, this has been generally sharp. 20 years of research, and you're somehow still the most clear, eye open person in the room for this. Thank you for being so open.
Hey, no problem. And thanks for having me on. It was really enjoyable to be here. So thanks for being such a good host.